The day my husband said he was leaving for peace, he took the house keys and left me with the silence. I remember standing in the doorway, my hands still on the doorknob, listening to his footsteps fade down the porch steps. The house felt different the moment he crossed the threshold. Too big, too hollow, like it had been emptied of sound but not of memory. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, staring at the place where his coat usually hung, noticing the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air, cedar and something sharp, like the edge of a blade. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He said it calmly, almost gently, as if he were explaining a weather forecast. "I need peace," he said. "I'm tired of the tension. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while." Peace. That word sat between us like a closed door. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. We had been married 26 years, long enough to learn when questions would only make things worse, long enough to recognize the tone he used when he'd already made up his mind. When the door finally closed, the house ticked and hummed like it always did. The refrigerator kicked on, the clock above the stove kept time. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere down the block. Life went on, unbothered by the fact that my marriage had just quietly stepped outside and shut the door behind it. That was the first ending. The lawsuit came later. Before all of this, before peace became an excuse and a weapon, we had a life that felt ordinary in the best way, predictable, worn in. We lived in a modest two-story house with beige siding and a creaky third step I kept meaning to fix. The kind of house you grow into, the kind that absorbs your arguments and your laughter and your children's footsteps until it feels less like wood and drywall and more like a witness. I met Daniel when I was 22. He worked at a local manufacturing plant. I was finishing community college and waitressing on weekends. He had a steady smile and a way of listening that made people feel important. When he proposed, it was simple. No crowd, no cameras, just a ring he'd saved for and a promise he said he meant. For years, I believed him. We raised 2 children in that house, birthday candles melted onto homemade cakes at the kitchen table, school backpacks piled by the front door, late-night talks on the couch when money was tight and the kids were asleep. I painted the living room twice, once when we moved in, once after our daughter left for college and I needed something to feel different. Daniel was never cruel, that's important to say. He could be distant, yes, stubborn, quiet to the point of absence, but cruel? No, not in the way people expect when they hear stories like this. That's why it took me so long to understand what was happening. The changes came quietly. He started staying late at work, then stopped mentioning projects altogether. Dinners became rushed, then skipped. He sat farther away from me on the couch like he needed space to breathe. When I asked if something was wrong, he sighed and said he was just tired. "I'm worn out," he told me once, rubbing his temples. "I just want some peace." At the time, I thought peace meant rest, a vacation, fewer responsibilities. I offered solutions the way wives do when they still believe they're part of the problem-solving team. We can talk, we can take a weekend away, we can go to counseling. He nodded, but never followed through. Looking back, I can see the first clue clearly. It was the bank statement. I paid the bills, always had. It was one of those unspoken arrangements that settled early in our marriage. Daniel earned more, I managed the household. One afternoon, as I sat at the dining table with the mail spread out in front of me, I noticed a transfer I didn't recognize, a large one. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Bonus, investment, something boring and responsible. When I asked him about it, he didn't look surprised. That should have been my second clue. "It's nothing," he said, "just moving things around." His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked away from mine just for a moment. I let it go. That was my mistake, one of many. When the night he left, he packed lightly, a suitcase, his laptop, a framed photo of the kids he said he wanted for his brother's place. He didn't take his tools, didn't take his winter coat. He said he'd be back once he cleared his head. "I don't want to fight," he said, standing by the door. "I just need space." I watched him go, telling myself this was temporary, that marriages have seasons, that silence could be healed. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived addressed to both of us. Thick, official, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside was a notice from an attorney. Daniel was filing a claim against the house. I sat at the table, the paper trembling in my hands, rereading the words until they blurred. He wasn't just leaving. He wasn't just asking for peace. He was suing me for partial ownership, for forced sale, for his share. The house I had maintained, the house I had raised our children in, the house I was still sleeping in, alone. That was when I understood. Peace was never the goal. It was preparation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, my hand steady in a way that surprised me. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through the curtains, lighting up the dust in the air. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, watchful. I didn't call Daniel right away. I sat there for a long time with that envelope on the table, my fingertips resting on the edge like it might burn me if I touched it again. The house felt colder somehow, even though the heat was on. I remember noticing the faint hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock, each second landing heavier than the last. When I finally did pick up the phone, it rang 4 times before he answered. "Hello?" His voice sounded lighter than it had in months, almost relaxed. "What is this?" I asked, holding the letter even though he couldn't see it. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. There was a pause, not a confused pause, not a shocked one, a measured pause like he'd been expecting this call. "It's just paperwork," he said. "My lawyer said it's better to be clear from the beginning." "Clear about what?" I asked. "That you left me, or that you're trying to take the house while you're at it?" "I'm not taking anything," he replied. "I'm asking for what's fair." Fair, that word again. Another soft word with sharp edges. I laughed once, short and humorless. "Fair," I said. "You leave, you stop paying bills, and now you want to force a sale?" "I put money into that house," he said, his tone firm now. "I worked for it. I deserve my share." I wanted to remind him of the nights I stayed up balancing checkbooks, of the repairs I handled when he was too tired, of the years I put my own career on hold to raise our children, but something told me it wouldn't matter. He had already rewritten the story in his head. "I needed peace," he said again, softer this time. "This is part of that." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink and stared out the kitchen window at the backyard we once planted together. The maple tree near the fence had grown crooked, leaning toward the light. I thought about how much care it took to keep something alive and how easy it was to walk away once it did. The days that followed felt unreal. I went to work, smiled at customers, came home to the same house that now felt like it was standing on uncertain ground. Friends asked how Daniel was doing. I said he was staying with his brother. I didn't tell them about the lawsuit. Not yet. Saying it out loud felt like making it permanent. The first meeting with my lawyer happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Her office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out, the marriage, the house, the letter, the phone call. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "Did you know he consulted an attorney before he left?" "No," I said. "He just needed space." She nodded slowly. "People often do both." That sentence settled into me like a stone. He hadn't just left emotionally, he'd planned his exit carefully, quietly. The transfer on the bank statement made sense now. The distance, the calm, preparation. My lawyer explained my options in measured tones: joint ownership, marital assets, potential outcomes, words that felt clinical compared to the life they were describing. She told me not to move out, not to sign anything, to document everything. As I left her office, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of something shift inside me. I had spent years trying to keep peace, swallowing discomfort, avoiding conflict. That instinct was still there, whispering that fighting back would only make things worse. But there was another feeling now, quieter but stronger. Resolve. Daniel called a few days later, his tone cordial, almost friendly. "I hope you're not taking this personally," he said. "This is just business." Business, as if our life together could be reduced to line items and percentages. "I've hired a lawyer," I told him. There was another pause, this one shorter, sharper. "I figured you might," he said. "That's fine." Fine. Everything was always fine when it suited him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the more I learned, the clearer the picture became. The house wasn't just a place to him anymore. It was leverage, a clean break, a way to walk away with something solid in his hands while I was left with memories and uncertainty. And then there were the questions he hadn't answered. Where had that transferred money gone? Why the sudden urgency? Why now? The answers didn't come all at once. They never do. They came in pieces, like a puzzle revealing an image I didn't want to see. It started with a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was at the grocery store one evening, reaching for a loaf of bread, when I heard Daniel's name spoken softly a few aisles over. I froze, my hand hovering midair. "He seems happier," a woman said, "lighter." Another voice responded, quieter. "Well, he's starting over. He deserves that." I turned the corner and saw my sister-in-law, Carol, standing with someone I didn't recognize. She spotted me and her face drained of color. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize." I smiled politely, the way you do when your heart is pounding and you don't want anyone to know it. We exchanged a few stiff pleasantries. She asked how I was holding up. I said I was managing. As I walked away, my chest tightened. Starting over. The phrase echoed in my mind. Starting over with what and with whom? That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked around me, settling the way old houses do. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past year, every missed dinner, every distracted answer, every time he said he wanted peace. I realized something then that felt both devastating and clarifying. Peace wasn't something he was searching for. It was something he believed I was standing in the way of. And if that was true, then the house, the life, the history was just collateral damage. I got up before dawn and made coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. I sat at the table with my notebook and began writing everything down: dates, amounts, conversations, not out of anger, but out of necessity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about not being erased. As the sun rose, spilling pale light across the kitchen floor, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear, not sorrow, clarity. Whatever Daniel thought this was, business, fairness, peace, it had become something else entirely for me. It had become a line, and I was done stepping back. The more I paid attention, the more I noticed how carefully Daniel had been pulling away long before he ever said the word peace. I used to think distance arrived suddenly, like a door slamming shut. But now I understood it often comes quietly, one small step at a time. A missed conversation, a look that doesn't linger, a decision made without you and justified later. In the weeks after the grocery store encounter, I began to see patterns I had once brushed aside. Daniel had stopped including me in financial discussions months before he left. He'd said he was simplifying things. I had believed him because trusting him felt easier than questioning everything we had built. One afternoon, as I sorted through old files in the study, I found a folder tucked behind the filing cabinet. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before, emails printed out, bank statements, notes scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. They weren't hidden carefully, just placed somewhere I rarely looked, as if he assumed I never would. There it was again, another transfer, another account, not joint. My hands felt cold as I flipped through the pages. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He'd been preparing for months, maybe longer. The realization landed slowly, like a heavy blanket settling over my shoulders. That night I confronted him, not in anger, but with the calm I'd learned could be more unsettling than raised voices. "You planned this," I said over the phone. "You planned leaving. You planned the lawsuit." He exhaled sharply. "I didn't plan to hurt you." "But you planned everything else." Silence stretched between us. "I needed a way out," he finally said. "I couldn't keep living the way we were." I almost asked him what way, but I already knew the answer would be vague. He'd been unhappy, he'd felt trapped, he'd lost himself, words people use when they want absolution without accountability. "What about me?" I asked quietly. Another pause, this one heavier. "You're strong. You'll be okay." I ended the call before he could say anything else. His confidence in my resilience felt less like a compliment and more like permission to leave me holding the weight alone. The legal process moved forward with a cold efficiency that surprised me. Letters arrived, deadlines were set, meetings scheduled. The house, once a backdrop to our shared life, was now reduced to numbers and percentages on paper. When our children found out, it fractured something delicate. My daughter called first. Her voice cracked as she asked, "Why is Dad doing this?" "I don't know," I said, because the truth was still too raw to explain. My son was quieter. He came over one evening, stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he belonged there anymore. He looked around the living room, at the couch where he'd once sprawled with homework, at the framed photos lining the wall. "He can't just take it. This is your home." I wanted to tell him that homes can be taken in many ways, that sometimes they're stripped from you piece by piece until all that's left is the shell. Instead, I put a hand on his arm and said, "I'm handling it." And I was, slowly, carefully. My lawyer uncovered details Daniel hadn't volunteered, the account he'd moved money into, the consultation he'd had months before leaving, the way he'd positioned himself to walk away clean. What she didn't find, what surprised even her, was that the house wasn't as straightforward as he believed. Years earlier, when we refinanced, certain decisions had been made, ones Daniel had signed without much thought, ones that now mattered deeply. When she explained it to me, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I wasn't as powerless as he assumed, sadness that it had come to this. Daniel's demeanor shifted once he realized the fight wouldn't be easy. His messages grew shorter, less friendly. The calm certainty he'd worn like armor began to crack. "This is getting ugly," he said during one call. "We don't need to drag this out." "I didn't start this," I replied. "No, but you're not making it easier." I thought about all the years I had made things easier for him, all the compromises I had justified in the name of keeping the peace. "I'm just standing where I've always stood. You're the one who moved." The tension spilled beyond us. Mutual friends grew uncomfortable, unsure whose side to take. Some avoided me altogether, others reached out quietly, offering support in hushed tones, as if my situation were contagious. The hardest moments came late at night when the house settled around me and memories rose uninvited. The sound of Daniel's keys at the door, his shoes kicked off by the stairs, the way he used to hum while fixing things, even when he pretended not to enjoy it. I grieved the marriage I thought I had, even as I prepared to defend the life I still wanted. The court date loomed closer. Each day brought a new wave of emotion, anger, fear, determination. I learned to sit with them instead of pushing them away, to let them pass through me like weather. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. I looked older than I remembered, tired, but there was something else there too, a steadiness. As I grabbed my coat and keys, I paused in the doorway, taking one last look at the house before stepping out. I didn't know what the outcome would be. I didn't know what Daniel was prepared to reveal or what would come to light once everything was laid bare. But I knew this much. Whatever happened next would no longer be decided without me. And that, in itself, felt like the beginning of something new. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a sterile blend that made everything feel smaller than it really was. I arrived early, sitting on a hard wooden bench with my purse clasped in both hands. Around me, other people waited, some whispering to lawyers, some staring at their phones, some looking as lost as I felt inside. When Daniel walked in, I barely recognized him. He wore a pressed jacket and a look of quiet confidence, the same expression he used to wear during important meetings at work. He nodded at me politely, like we were acquaintances, instead of two people whose lives had been stitched together for over 2 decades. I wondered if he practiced that look in the mirror, the calm, the distance. We didn't speak. The hearing moved slowly, words floating past me in a language that felt both familiar and foreign. Ownership, equity, intent. I listened as my lawyer laid out the facts, each sentence steady, each document placed carefully on the table like a piece of evidence, not just of finances, but of history. Daniel's lawyer spoke next. His argument was clean, efficient. Daniel had invested financially. He had the right to reclaim his portion. The marriage had broken down. This was a reasonable request. Reasonable. I watched Daniel as they spoke for him. He kept his gaze forward, jaw set, hands folded. He looked peaceful, the kind of peace that comes from believing you've already won. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer nodded at me gently. I stood, my knees weak but my voice clear. "This house," I said, "isn't just an asset. It's where I raised our children. It's where I maintained the home while my husband worked. I paid the bills. I managed the refinancing. I was present." Daniel shifted in his seat for the first time. "I didn't know my husband had planned to leave," I continued. "But he did. He prepared financially while I was still believing we were trying to fix our marriage." I didn't look at him as I spoke. I focused on the judge, on the truth I had learned to articulate without apology. The documents mattered. The refinancing terms mattered. The timeline mattered. When the judge reviewed them, the room seemed to hold its breath. The ruling wasn't final that day. It rarely is. But something shifted. Daniel's certainty faltered. I saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, the way his eyes flicked to his lawyer, searching. Outside the courthouse, he finally spoke to me. "You didn't have to make it personal," he said, his voice low. I met his gaze for the first time in weeks. "You sued me. It was already personal." He looked away. The weeks that followed were tense and exhausting. Negotiations stretched on, emotions frayed. But with each exchange, Daniel seemed less sure of his position. The leverage he thought he had wasn't as solid as he believed. Then came the part he hadn't planned for. A mutual friend reached out one evening, her voice hesitant. "I didn't know if I should tell you," she said.
But Daniel's been talking, saying you're being difficult, that you're trying to take everything. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the rewriting of the story, the quiet erosion of my character. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and meant it. I didn't confront him about it. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of surfacing without my help. During mediation, Daniel's lawyer pushed for a quick resolution, a settlement that favored him. My lawyer listened, then calmly presented the full financial trail, every transfer, every consultation, every step Daniel took before leaving. The room grew quiet. Daniel's face flushed. For the first time, he looked exposed. Not angry, not defensive, just caught. "This changes things," the mediator said carefully. I watched Daniel swallow hard. The peace he'd chased unraveled into something messy and public. The controlled exit he'd engineered now required explanation. The settlement discussions shifted tone. Compromise replaced confidence. The house was no longer something he could simply claim. It was something he might lose entirely if the process continued. In the end, the agreement was reached quietly. No dramatic courtroom victory, no raised voices. Daniel withdrew his claim to force the sale. The house would remain mine. In exchange, I agreed to terms that allowed us both to move forward without further legal battles. When it was over, I felt lighter than I expected. Not triumphant, just done. Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't apologize either. He signed the papers with a tight jaw and left without looking back. Word traveled fast, as it always does. Friends who had been unsure where to stand now knew the truth. Some reached out with apologies for doubting me. Others simply showed up, dropping off meals, offering company, sitting with me in the quiet. The house felt different again, not haunted, not watchful, anchored. One afternoon, as I swept the porch, I noticed the third step, the one that had creaked for years. I laughed softly to myself, grabbed my tools, and fixed it. The sound disappeared, replaced by solid, steady silence. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I realized then that peace doesn't come from leaving. It comes from standing your ground without losing yourself. Daniel had walked away searching for quiet. I stayed and found my voice.
After the settlement, the days didn't suddenly turn bright and easy. Healing never works that way. What changed was the weight. It lifted just enough for me to breathe without feeling like something was pressing on my chest. The house felt mine again, not because a judge or a lawyer said so, but because the fear had finally left its walls. For weeks, I moved through each room slowly, almost ceremonially. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years, sorted through old paperwork, donated clothes Daniel had left behind, folding them neatly instead of angrily. There was no rush anymore, no one waiting to claim space that wasn't theirs. One afternoon, I found a box in the back of the closet labeled MISC. Inside were small things I'd forgotten existed: our children's baby shoes, a cracked picture frame, a stack of old letters Daniel used to write when we were young and hopeful. I sat on the floor and read one, then another. He used to be kind in his words, thoughtful. He talked about building a future, about partnership, about growing old together on a porch that looked a lot like the one I now sat on alone. I didn't cry for the man he became. I cried for the man he had been, and for the woman I was when I believed those promises would never change. Our children adjusted in their own ways. My daughter called more often, sometimes just to talk about nothing. My son stopped by on Sundays, helping me with small repairs, filling the house with laughter that felt familiar and grounding. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating takeout, my daughter asked quietly, "Are you okay, Mom?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm learning how to be," I said. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. In that moment, I understood something important. Staying had taught my children something leaving never could.
That dignity isn't loud. That strength doesn't always look like escape. Sometimes it looks like endurance, followed by clarity. Daniel stayed mostly silent after the settlement. No calls, no messages, just distance. I heard through others that he'd moved into an apartment across town, that he seemed restless, that peace hadn't arrived the way he expected it to. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, only a quiet acceptance. His journey was no longer tied to mine. The house slowly transformed, not in appearance, but in feeling. I repainted the bedroom a soft, warm color instead of the cool gray Daniel preferred. I rearranged the furniture, moving the couch closer to the window where the light was better in the afternoons. I planted herbs in the backyard, their scent rising when I brushed past them. These weren't grand gestures, they were choices, and each one felt like a small reclamation. There were nights when loneliness crept in, uninvited. I'd sit in the living room, the television murmuring softly, and feel the absence of another body in the house. Those moments were honest. I didn't try to rush through them. I let them exist, then pass. One evening, as I washed dishes, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology, not for an explanation, not for him to realize what he lost. The peace Daniel chased by leaving had arrived for me by staying long enough to see the truth clearly. Months later, a letter arrived in the mail. Daniel's handwriting. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, the note was short. He wrote that he hoped I was well, that things hadn't turned out the way he imagined, that he was still figuring things out. There was no apology, no ownership, just uncertainty. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, not out of anger, but because it no longer had a place in my life. Some conversations don't need answers to be complete. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees, the sky painted in soft oranges and purples. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and summer settling in. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything that mattered, not just the house, but my sense of self. I had been taught, like many women, that peace meant compromise, that keeping things smooth required silence, that endurance was the same as happiness. I knew better now. Peace is not something someone takes when they leave. It's something you claim when you stop abandoning yourself. The house creaked softly as it cooled for the night. The repaired steps stayed silent beneath my feet. I smiled at that small, steady proof of change. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. Not because nothing bad could happen again, but because I trusted myself to handle it if it did. Sometimes I sit in this house in the quiet hours of the evening and think about how close I came to losing more than walls and a roof. I almost lost myself. For a long time, I believed peace was something you earned by staying quiet, by being understanding, by shrinking your needs so someone else could feel comfortable. I thought love meant holding things together no matter the cost. But this experience taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Peace doesn't come from walking away without accountability. It doesn't come from rewriting the truth to make yourself feel lighter. And it doesn't come from leaving someone else to clean up the mess. Real peace comes when you tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. When you stand your ground without cruelty. When you choose dignity over silence. My husband left looking for peace. I stayed and found strength. Not because I won a legal battle, not because I kept the house, but because I stopped believing that love required me to disappear. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a decision, whether to stay quiet, to walk away, or to finally speak, know this: you deserve a life where your presence is not treated as an obstacle. You are not difficult for asking for fairness, you are not bitter for protecting what you built, and you are not wrong for choosing yourself. Now, I want to ask you something. Did this story move you? Would you have done what I did if you were in my place? I love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to sit with my story and for supporting this channel. If stories like this speak to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself and don't give your peace away.
Sometimes I sit in this house in the quiet hours of the evening and think about how close I came to losing more than walls and a roof. I almost lost myself. For a long time, I believed peace was something you earned by staying quiet, by being understanding, by shrinking your needs so someone else could feel comfortable. I thought love meant holding things together no matter the cost. But this experience taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Peace doesn't come from walking away without accountability. It doesn't come from rewriting the truth to make yourself feel lighter. And it doesn't come from leaving someone else to clean up the mess. Real peace comes when you tell the truth, even when your voice shakes, when you stand your ground without cruelty, when you choose dignity over silence. My husband left looking for peace. I stayed and found strength. Not because I won a legal battle, not because I kept the house, but because I stopped believing that love required me to disappear. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of a decision, whether to stay quiet, to walk away, or to finally speak, know this. You deserve a life where your presence is not treated as an obstacle. You are not difficult for asking for fairness. You are not bitter for protecting what you built. And you are not wrong for choosing yourself. Now, I want to ask you something. Did this story move you? Would you have done what I did if you were in my place? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to sit with my story and for supporting this channel. If stories like this speak to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself and don't give your peace away.